Spruce Pine is a small town in North Carolina. There's a reasonable chance you've never heard of it, even though in his best-selling recent book, Material World, Ed Conway describes it as being massively important, absurdly, scarily important. This is what he said about it. In the material world, there are few cases where we are so utterly reliant on a single place. There are a few micro-producers in India and Siberia, but nothing to rival the consistency and quantity of the two mines in spruce pine. What do these mines produce? The high-purity quartz that is used for advanced semiconductors. You know, those things that are now relied upon, one way or another, for the generation of reportedly 99% of global GDP. That stuff. Conway goes on, what if something happened to those mines? What if, say, the single road that winds down from them to the rest of the world was destroyed in a landslide? Short answer, it would not be pretty. Here's something scary, says one veteran of the sector. If you flew over the two mines in spruce pine with a crop duster loaded with a very particular powder, you could end the world's production of semiconductors and solar panels within 6 months. No high-purity quartz means no Czochralski crucibles, which means no monocrystalline silicon wafers, which means, well, the end of computer chip manufacture as we know it. He continued, we would adapt, find a new process or an alternative substance, but it would be a grisly few years. The good news, nobody has been dusting that very particular powder, whatever it may be, at least not so far. Yeah, but there is some bad news.
It's cleaning up from the worst flooding ever on record for the state. More than 100 people are dead from Helene, a number that's still expected to rise. The city's now isolated after roads leading there flooded and cell towers were knocked down. One emergency official calls it biblical devastation.
Amongst many other places, Hurricane Helene struck spruce pine, dumping an unfeasibly large amount of water onto it. This caused flooding, power outages, communication disruptions, and damage to critical infrastructure. The executive director of the local business association in the town, Spencer Bost, said that floodwater levels there had reached about 10 feet, up to the awnings. Unsurprisingly, the mining company Sibelco confirmed it resulted in the shutting down of the two mines. The company said it was working to mitigate the impact and to resume operations as soon as possible. But it gave no clues as to what that actually means. Days? Unlikely. Weeks? Months? Ever? Why worry, some might say. After all, just presents an opportunity for competitors to ramp up their own production to fill in the gap. That's how capitalism works, yeah? Except the reason why spruce pine dominates the sector is because nobody else can compete with the purity, absurd purity, the consistency and the quantity of the material produced there. The silicon wafers that come out of it, that are the basis for semiconductors, require highly pure product. Since the individual chips are so tiny, the slightest impurities can significantly degrade performance. Spruce pine produces ultra-pure polysilicon, which is 99.9999999% silicon, which is what it needs to be. In other words, the ability of spruce pine to produce at that quality is extremely specialized. Replicating or replacing that would likely take years. And it's not just for semiconductor chips, hugely important though those are. Those silicon wafers are also essential for the machines that manufacture the chips, so further up the supply chain, as well as things like solar panels. So how vulnerable are we? Well, that rather depends on how long the operations will actually be knocked out for. According to an analysis carried out from recent company reports by Semi-Analysis, existing inventory of raw wafers is relatively low at the moment. 3 months' worth held by Global Wafers and Siltronic, 8 months' worth at Sumco. This does provide some buffer. I mean, it could have been just weeks or days' worth. If production was able to restart, say within 3 months, that would mean disruption would be relatively restrained, but you have to bear in mind that it takes a significant period of time to manufacture computer chips. It takes weeks to months to turn lumps of polysilicon into wafers, and then it takes weeks to months to turn that into a silicon chip. Hence the disruption that happened during the COVID period, where suddenly car manufacturers, amongst others, found themselves unable to access the advanced chips that they normally relied on. So, even with 3 months inventory, if the facilities were actually down for that length of time, there would still be a gap between the existing stocks and any new supply. Johan Bernreuter, head of Bernreuter Research and a solar industry expert, told the Business to Community website, "If a disruption went on for more than a few weeks, it would pose a serious problem for the production of silicon ingots needed in the photovoltaic or PV industry." On his blog, Ed Conway said he had been speaking to the former chief executive of the Quartz Company, John Walker, someone very much experienced in the spruce pine operation. And he wrote this: "How long does he think the plant will be down for? He didn't want to put a figure on it, but I came away with the impression that 6 months would be a good result." Walker explained it like this: "You've got to let the floodwaters subside and water quality to return to normal levels. That may take several weeks. Then you've got to clean everything and ascertain what equipment you need to replace. If the damage is extensive, equipment lead time and availability of labour are significant factors how long it takes to get operations up and running. Processing and refining facilities on the river will have been flooded. The railway tracks have been damaged, along with the road, the power, water treatment and communications infrastructure. Any locally stored inventory will be, of course, ruined, and every pump and motor and gearbox is currently underwater." And Walker added for good measure, "And since this is high purity quartz, you have now got silt and soil in there. Cleaning and sorting it out will take time." Add all that together, yeah, you can see why 6 months might be a good result, even with the added sense of urgency you might expect the exercise to be imbued with. Now, there is high-purity quartz elsewhere. There are mines in Russia, in Brazil and China that make high-purity quartz. There are some companies with capacity to make high-purity quartz artificially. But according to Lita Sean Ray, President and Chief Executive of TechSet, it would take many years to scale up production of any of those alternatives to match the capacity of the spruce pine mines. Right now, there are just no viable sources. Every time I've asked in the last 2 decades, the question always comes back, well, where else are we supposed to get it? But spruce pine had a pretty unique combination of the highest purity, the greatest availability and the lowest price. While it's not the end of the world as we know it, it's going to be immensely disruptive because ramping up production in non-optimized places is going to be a lot of time and higher cost. One of the key points of all of this is just how dependent our modern societies have become on certain material flows and processes. Remember, 99% of global GDP now requires this stuff. And then just how vulnerable we've become around just a few locations as a result. A couple of months ago, we were worrying about the fact that the most advanced semiconductors production by the company TSMC had been disrupted by an earthquake in Taiwan. Because it's obviously an act of pure genius to cite such a delicate and important factory process in a country that's on the so-called Ring of Fire, with the world's most active earthquakes and volcanoes all over the place. TSMC made an agreement with the US government to build a major plant in the US. They chose Texas rather than California because, earthquakes. But Hurricane Helene has now reminded us that actually many locations that are otherwise considered secluded and peaceful can nevertheless become points of vulnerability. So if we want a stable world economy, we logically have to build redundancy into the system, so we're not so exposed to just one location that could be taken out. The challenge with that, we ended up with those single vulnerabilities because they came with a cost advantage. So at a time when real pain from the cost of living is leading to all sorts of conflict and backlash in different parts of the world, are we quite ready for a world that is safer against the shocks that haven't yet happened yet, so nobody much cares about them, at the cost of more expensive goods for everyone? I'm thinking probably not. Let's hope that doesn't come back to bite us even harder than Hurricane Helene just did. Because, crossing your fingers and hoping it's a perfectly viable strategy to put the success of the entire global human community on, isn't it?